Sophie Tomlinson. She's a client director at H&H with a vast experience in internal communications. Sophie will take us through her presentation titled Nailing the Narrative, How a Single Campaign Can Leave a Legacy. She'll demonstrate how H&H helps clients connect their narrative to business outcomes to inspire and engage their employees. So without further ado, let's welcome Sophie to the stage.
Good morning. Hi, Marta. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. I'm going to leave the stage to you. So I'll bring your presentation now.
Great, thank you. Well, it's so lovely to hear about meaningful conversations this morning, and that's really set the scene beautifully for our next session of the day, which, as Marta said, is all about nailing that narrative. So let's get started, shall we? Did you know? It is scientifically proven that every single one of us will fall victim to bad, unclear, or downright confusing messaging at some point in our lives. Well, this is probably true, but it's as yet unproven. But in all seriousness, you might say, yeah, so what's the problem, Sophie? Yeah, bad comms exists. It can be a bit embarrassing, but, shrug it off and move on. But let me ask you, what if the stakes were a little bit higher? Let's step into the workplace, where more than 1 in 3 employees feel that their internal comms is not well organised or structured, and this leads to a sense of confusion and information overload. And what's worse, we know that when employees feel overwhelmed by internal comms, they are 30% less likely to feel motivated to contribute to their company's goals. So, what's the bottom line is that bad comms is actually bad for business. But what can we do about it? At H&H, we've worked with hundreds of clients, supporting them to deliver standout comms that help make the world of work better, nailing that messaging to create comms that engage and inspire, so colleagues can feel better connected and be happier and more fulfilled, and crucially, more motivated. As Marta said, today I'll be sharing with you a recent example of a narrative to support an internal comms campaign and how it left a legacy beyond the initial activity. Then we'll dive into some top tips for your very own narrative success. So let's talk about narratives. As many of you know, the cornerstone of any communications challenge is asking ourselves, what do we want the receiver of our message to think, feel, and ultimately do? Because good comms doesn't just provide information or education. More often than not, it compels you to do something different. It's about changing attitudes and behaviours. For example, today you are listening to me talk to you about narratives. Ideally, after this session, I'd like you to think about what a narrative is and how it can be helpful in an internal comms context. I'd like you to feel energized and equipped with some tools and fresh perspectives to help shape the messaging of your next upcoming project. And ultimately, I'd love you to put some of these learnings into practice in your day-to-day work. So if we want to change attitudes and behaviours, having a narrative can help us achieve this. So what is a narrative, Sophie? Well, simply put, a narrative is just a story. And for internal comms, telling stories is incredibly useful. We humans find stories more memorable and relatable than simple facts and figures. And so a narrative can help bring to life your purpose and business strategy in a way that is easy for colleagues to understand and relate to, helping colleagues take an active role in thinking about their individual contribution to company success, shifting that mindset from what can my organisation do for me to what can I do for my organisation. So let's dive into what this can look like in action. Last year, JTC, a financial services company, were faced with a challenge. Shared ownership, where everyone who works there has the opportunity to own a financial stake in the business, is an integral part of who they are and what they believe in. And it really sets them apart in the industry. But after a period of rapid expansion and acquisition, the business had doubled in size, and they were faced with a new employee population, with over 60% never having experienced a share award previously, including 50% of all managers. With an upcoming share award on the horizon, there was a clear need for refreshed comms to help everybody get prepared and on board. In past years, JTC had built up a lot of goodwill and trust within the business and enjoyed an unspoken understanding and buy-in to what shared ownership was and the JTC culture as a whole. But now, with a new look workforce, the status quo had obviously shifted, and it would be unwise to assume that managers and individual teams would be equipped to help explain and set out the wider context of the share award to new joiners. Plus, not everyone has the same level of financial literacy, and so it's really important to set a baseline level of understanding. So the first requirement was clearly to address the immediate information gaps, so everybody can understand the more technical mechanics of the share award and feel prepared to take appropriate action. And it's vital that any messaging around this is kept clear and consistent, because the implications for getting it wrong would be really serious. Individuals might feel confused and miss important steps and maybe even be impacted financially. And this could result in losing trust in the business and might eventually lead to staff attrition. However, this was also a fantastic opportunity to reinforce the company's ethos, helping the new joiners and fresh faces understand that having a shared ownership mindset is a fundamental pillar of JTC's Stronger Together culture and supports the business in achieving their purpose of maximizing potential for clients and themselves. Because shared ownership is so much more than owning shares in a business. It's about everyone getting involved, taking an active role in work, and understanding what and how they can add to the culture. This was the perfect opportunity, therefore, to employ a narrative, breaking it down into what we want every colleague at JTC to think, feel, and do. And that's exactly how it went. The messaging was grouped around 3 pillars: think like owners, act like owners, so everybody can be rewarded as owners. Here I'm sharing an excerpt from the first piece of content that was created and launched to employees, which set the scene and introduced the leading message, "We are all owners of the business," alongside the 3 narrative pillars. And this clear, concise messaging laid the foundations to deliver a campaign of impactful comms across the business, helping to ground the practical tools and guidance around receiving a share award in the bigger picture of what it means to be an owner of the business. So although it was created primarily for engagement comms around the share award, this messaging proved such a hit with senior leaders and colleagues alike that it had a reach far beyond its original purpose. Leaders began to use this messaging to help articulate and frame their team updates and divisional messaging to staff. And when it was time to refresh the business strategy for the next 5 years, thinking, acting, and being rewarded as owners was the perfect anchor. Here, you can see how the narrative sits comfortably alongside JTC's purpose, values, and strategic vision. Think, act, reward acts as the foundation on which the business goals will be achieved. They are shared goals, and it's a collective endeavour as everyone is an owner of the business. And so because the narrative is so aligned to the purpose, you can see how it really easily is dialed up to suit those big ticket strategy comms pieces. However, it can also be dialed down and be used in more business as usual updates. For example, when it was time to share the results of the latest People survey, the new narrative proved to be the perfect hook. Rather than a simple "you said we did" campaign, you can see how the results were framed as colleagues having their say as owners of the business. And this created a really powerful connection between employee voice and company culture. And by using this narrative across those company-wide communications, a clear and consistent message was established and embedded across the business. And 70% of colleagues responded to a survey saying that think, act, reward positioning really helped them better understand shared ownership as a whole. Once the Share Award campaign had run its course, you might think that Think, Act, Reward would then be shelved, but no. Because its messaging was so impactful, it has left a legacy in the business. So much so that the learning team are creating an onboarding module based around it for new starters, as well as a learning module specifically designed for leadership training to help managers better understand and articulate what being an owner at JTC looks like, so they can in turn role model for their teams. So let's dive in now and break down why this narrative was so impactful. Well, first and foremost, it stayed simple with one singular focus: ownership. We're exposed to thousands of messages every day, at work, at home, on the commute, on our devices, which means that when you're trying to get your colleagues' attention, you now have to work harder than ever. Plus, in a post-COVID workplace, where the majority of us are communicating digitally, it's even more of a challenge to cut through the noise. You get a few seconds of someone's attention before the next team ping or email or Slack notification. And more often than not, people are multitasking too, responding to messages whilst on a Zoom call. So long attention spans are out. Short, bite-sized content is in. So a single focus to your messaging is absolutely key, keeping it short and sweet and aligned to your strategy. This makes it more memorable, but it also means, as we've just seen, that it's able to flex and adapt to suit changing needs. A long, complex, overly specific narrative might be perfectly suited to a singular purpose, but it would likely have a really short shelf life, and that's not very economical. So it's important to always have the eventual so what in mind. What is your message ultimately in service of? Remember, we're always thinking about what do we want people to do. Ultimately here, we want people to feel engaged and connected to the business purpose and motivated to play their part in achieving objectives. So having a narrative that connects back up to your purpose means that we can weave that golden thread between all the messaging, connecting everything together. And having an agreed narrative also ensures consistency of messaging across the business, which helps all leaders and managers able to sing from the same hymn sheet. And research suggests that a message must be received at least 7 times in different ways for it to be heard and registered properly. So consistency really is key here. And being able to share the same message across different channels in different ways only strengthens its meaning. This can include surfacing specific words or phrases in business as usual comms, like we saw with the engagement survey results. And by dialing your messaging up or down, but having it stay connected to the bigger picture, helps reaffirm understanding about how everyone's actions contribute to those larger business objectives. Plus, from a comms perspective, having that overarching narrative means that when things come into the team from left field, you can more often than not slot them into the narrative, helping the unplanned ticket items feel more planned and less overwhelming for colleagues who are already overloaded with messaging. For example, a new IT transformation project or a relaunch of your employer brand. Rather than having these separate campaigns and messaging, consider bringing them into your narrative, keeping everything integrated rather than siloed, helping colleagues to understand the role they play in the company and what they can do to help achieve business outcomes. And this reinforces that every project and initiative in the business is in service of the overall purpose. So even if you have multiple work streams to shout about, every voice is singing in harmony rather than a cacophony of clashing cymbals. And pro tip, if you do have a high level, single focus narrative that is aligned to your purpose and you are still finding it difficult to shoehorn a message into, you might want to rethink that message. Okay, so we want colleagues to feel engaged and inspired, positively driven to contribute to business objectives. It's helpful then to look at the factors that actively contribute to job satisfaction and indeed dissatisfaction. Herzberg, a 20th century psychologist, defined this as the 2-factor theory, stating that there are hygiene factors, such as pay and benefits, and motivating factors, such as recognition, a sense of purpose and involvement, And these factors independently work from each other. So improving one set of factors doesn't necessarily translate to the other. And both of these factors are really important to consider as part of a positive work environment, although comms is less able to impact the hygiene factors, as these tend to be more fixed policies. However, motivating factors have a greater impact on satisfaction than hygiene factors, appealing to our higher level needs. Because humans are hardwired to find motivation in things that give them joy, purpose, and meaning. And communications can have a huge impact on how these opportunities are positioned in the workplace, which is why think, act, and reward was so powerful. Rather than focusing on the financial payout, instead, the focus was placed on the autonomy and purpose colleagues have at JTC, reinforcing all the things they own together and reminding them why they come to work. So we've nailed the content, but how to present it? Well, we can employ some really simple rhetorical devices to lend our messaging some weight. Let's start with the rule of 3. 3 really is the magic number. It's a fact that odd numbers of things are more pleasing to the human brain and more likely to stick. Think of any famous phrase or story. Goldilocks and the 3 bears, 3 pigs and the big bad wolf, 3 blind mice, 3 musketeers. You get the picture. Even the latest pop earworm from Sabrina Carpenter's Please, Please, Please plays into this. And doesn't it just stick in your head? So consider harnessing this crowd-pleasing element to group your ideas together and give them some weight. Think, act, reward. Because a single statement can sometimes feel weak. 2 might be a coincidence, but 3 always feels like a really considered choice. And it's not just the power of 3, whether it's repetition, alliteration, or sibilance. It's important to think of ways to make the words and phrases that you're using stand out. Devices like these can tickle the senses and make them more memorable and resonant. And this works in every case. Because, for example, get ready to get moving and grooving sounds so much better than prepare to dance, doesn't it? So let's finish with some ways you might want to set the scene for narrative success using a handy and very appropriate mnemonic, once upon a time. Because after all, we are telling a story. O stands for opportunity. Every narrative needs to have a sense of opportunity, a possibility for everyone involved to make something happen. A powerful story makes people want to get involved, so there has to be a sense that there is space there for them to do so. U stands for uplifting. A successful narrative is one that uplifts and inspires. This doesn't necessarily mean that it can't reference a challenge, especially if you're using a narrative to help support a big change program. But it needs to at least end on a note of optimism, leaving colleagues feel hopeful about the future. A is for adaptable. As we've seen, a great narrative can bend and flex. So make sure you can dial it up and down depending on your comms needs, be that relating to a company-wide strategy launch or a simple business as usual update. And finally, T stands for tangible, because the most powerful stories allow colleagues to put themselves at the centre and see themselves as the hero. So it needs to be tangible and relatable. And we're not talking about a lofty tale of Marvick comic book powers, but relating back to what every individual, everyday hero can do to contribute to business objectives, understanding how they can make a difference in their role. So let's end with a little story. Your story. Once upon a time, you sat down to write the narrative for your next big project. Before you got your pen out, You made sure that your messaging was single-minded and linked to your strategy. You focused on how colleagues could find joy, purpose, and meaning in their work. And then you created a powerful piece of rhetoric. You filled it with opportunity, the possibility for everyone to get behind it and make amazing things happen. You used uplifting language, inspiring everyone to get on board. You were able to adapt it across different business areas and priorities, and you made it tangible so everyone could see how they could make a difference. This led to an engaged workforce with greater profitability, increased productivity, and a huge reduction in employee turnover. Now, wouldn't that be a great story to tell? Well, I hope that has sparked your imagination today and given you some ideas to take away into your everyday. And if you're looking for more inspiration, please go and take a look at our resources on our website.
Sophie, thank you so much for this great step-by-step presentation and process of just really singling out that single narrative. I mean, you as internal comms experts, you must have clients coming up to you and saying, well, we've got this great story, we've got this great purpose for the business, but often communications just find themselves stuck. It's like, how are we gonna, communicate that? So it kind of cascades throughout the whole organization, and even the the employees at the front office level, etc., depending on obviously different organizations, understands that level and can really live and through it. So what's your thoughts on that? What's your like piece of advice for clients coming to you to wanting to get that narrative right?
Yeah, I think it's always really easy when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the middle of a project, to make it. You want everyone to have all the information immediately, and you want them to know all the details because you yourself are so ingrained in it. But as we saw, it's really important to really strip it back, take it up as high as you possibly can, so that it's really clear, simple, single-minded. If you can really get that, it sounds sort of deceptive, but simple really is better because it's more memorable. And then if you can't strip back your messaging to some really clear principles, you might want to have to rethink it. It might not be as clear as you might have first thought. And actually, as we see, people are so busy, they haven't got time to engage with something that's really complicated and layered. So having that, something that you can use, then obviously if you want to have a bit more of a complex detail, we need detail. People need to know what's going on, but it's having that framework to put around that detail, which really makes it clear for everybody.
I think that's a really important piece of advice because myself, I'm a very detailed person. So sometimes just taking that step back and finding what's really important and what needs to be communicated can be really hard. So having a good structure to do that is really important. So that's really insightful. Thank you. Any closing remarks from you after the presentation? Anything?
Yeah, I would just invite everyone to have a bit of fun with it. I think, some people can get quite stuck in comms. It's very serious and detailed, but, just because it is relating to something business related, it doesn't have to be formal. People respond to informal, accessible language that they can kind of see themselves reflected in. And so I think it's always have your audience in mind. It doesn't matter really, you might be having a very different kind of relation to the work, but actually thinking about what are the people who are ultimately going to be receiving this message feeling, what do they need, and putting yourselves in their shoes and coming up with messaging that feels really authentic and easy to understand.
Right. Keeping it human in a world of change.
Human. I love that. Yes, let's keep it human, keep it fun. Remind yourselves who you're talking to. We're not robots, and we respond to really nice language.
That's really, really great advice. Well, thank you so much, Sophie. We're so grateful for your time and sharing all this great insight with us today. I'll let you go on with the rest of your day. Hopefully you'll stay and watch some of the other presentations with us as we move along.
Can't wait. Thanks so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you to you, and thank you to H&H, our sponsor. Thank you.